Hello and welcome to today's Podcast Plus, where we bring you insight for best practice in bite-sized chunks. Today we draw upon the third in the series of our home working and remote working arrangements for law firms. Today, having previously covered supervision and also remote working policies, we're going to be looking at managing client care and finding new business. My name is Neil Partridge, I'm the Operations Director at PDA Legal, and our co-author of today's session is Samantha Aldridge, who is a Director at P&P Hub. We're also starting today with a slightly fresh approach to the podcast with a nice new image, which we thought nicely summed up not only the end of the holiday season and the emergence into whatever COVID is leaving for us, but also the quest and the search for managing new clients and existing clients as well. So let's move straight into the background of our concerns, I suppose. Well, the SRA requires at 4.4 of the Code of Conduct for Firms that you have an effective system for supervising client matters. If you're a Lexel firm, 6.1 of the Lexel standard says you must have a policy for client care, and that's going to include how inquiries from potential clients are dealt with, sufficient resources, competence, capacity, timely responses, and so on. And you need to ensure the service you provide is competent and delivered in a timely manner. And this is actually linked to 4.2 of the SRA Code for firms and 3.2 of the SRA Code of Conduct for RELs and RFLs. But also you keep the affairs of current and former clients confidential. So says the SRA Code at 6.3. That obviously poses some significant challenges for firms, particularly as, talking to many as I have recently, I would say as many as 90%, possibly more, still have significant portions of their workforce either furloughed or working from home, and very few indeed are actually managing to meet with clients face-to-face at anything like the volume that they were pre-March this year. Well, what sort of problems are we seeing arising with this? Well, complaints obviously is going to be an issue, and indeed the SRA recently posted a report about handling complaints. Now there's no surprises that the top three complaints were the number one, delay, failure to advise, and excessive costs. Now how might that affect us in our current environment? Well, delay, of course, we have touch points there perhaps with capacity, because of course with furloughing, etc., that's going to be a bit of a challenge. Failure to advise, well, that could be a link to supervision. How have you been making sure that information is provided to clients, the matters are conducted effectively, and so forth? And excessive costs, well, that links to fees and billing, obviously. And we've got to recognise the fact that, client finances may not be what they were a few months ago, and there may be challenges there as well. And indeed, the Law Gazette recently published an article that said that indeed thousands of complaints are piling up. So let's also explore some of the other challenges that we're seeing. Complaints about slow service, timely responses, and ensuring everything is being picked up is causing some concern. And this, of course, as I've said, may be due to the fact that people are working from home, are working remotely, or indeed furloughed. Perhaps even roles at the firm have changed. Where client care is concerned, there's confidentiality to consider, and of course data protection. When people are working from home, for instance, where are they locking their notebooks at night? Assuming they are locking them somewhere. How are files being kept secure? Are there post-it notes on people's tables or dining tables at home, or wherever they might be working? Also ensuring that the client is kept up to date with who is dealing with their matter. Now, this has certainly changed in many firms. Whole departments have shifted. Perhaps a supervisor has changed. Perhaps someone who deals with complaints and other matters has also changed. So that is creeping in, I think, as a bit of an issue. Also providing next steps in client care letters now, and client update letters, I should say. They're not necessarily being followed up on as often as they should in some cases. This might include matter strategies, but also bearing in mind on that note that the other side of litigation matters or other parties in conveyancing matters may themselves be held up due to the same reasons, because of staff on their side being furloughed or perhaps decisions being a little bit slower coming through. Well, of course, your client needs to be told that and needs to be told what the situation is. How is that effectively being done? And are your supervision processes making sure that's being done? There's also issues with central systems not being monitored, such as key dates and undertakings. Of course, both of those can cause serious problems if they're not adequately monitored and managed. And then, of course, there's new business. Now, as we move out of the COVID environment, and COVID's not going away anytime soon, we need still to think about the lifeblood of the business. And the lifeblood of the business is, of course, client work coming in. So when people are working remotely or perhaps coming to the office from time to time, but either way you've got a workforce in a very different working environment to perhaps 6 months ago, how are staff motivated for working remotely to engage with clients? If phones are on divert, and a great many phones are on divert, where are clients being sent to? Are any of them slipping through the net? Bearing in mind this could affect existing as well as new clients. And if you're reviewing your marketing, or are you reviewing your marketing, are you considering local social media and platforms, bearing in mind that most people will instruct a local legal professional? If your marketing was networking, what are you going to do now, bearing in mind that face-to-face networking is, well, it's not a thing of the past, but it's not happening very often at the moment. So what are you going to do? So we've looked at a few things, Samantha and I, that you might like to consider. We're not going to go perhaps as far as calling them solutions, but certainly things which we think will help. Well, first of all, stay in touch with your clients, perhaps via video calls, although, again, do be wary about different platforms. Some are definitely better than others. And of course, video conferencing can be a little bit difficult where perhaps there's a vulnerable client, or perhaps if it was a divorce or other sensitive domestic related matter, perhaps there could be somebody in the room who your client does not want to have privy to what you're discussing. But that is certainly an option, and it has hugely grown recently. Do you have a reception area? Perhaps, and I was speaking to a firm yesterday, they have a reception area downstairs away from the rest of the office. Now, perhaps if there were blinds that could be drawn, that reception area could temporarily be redeployed as a meeting room by appointment to meet with clients. Just a thought. Now, of course, the guidance and we call it guidance, they are the rules from the government, are changing day to day, but it's worth having a look at. But also perhaps dovetail your client care letters to clients with regular file inactivity checks. So pull those files out of the cupboard or look across your matter file system. I'm sure everyone's doing that anyway, but consider, do we need to update the client? Have we updated the client in line with their expectations? But also, has there been a change of fee earner, for instance, or a significant change in how the matter might progress? Now think about marketing and promotional activity. Well, you do need to keep your website up to date anyway, but perhaps there's a message you could put on the website for your clients as to how they might contact you during these challenging times. Particularly if you're carrying out face-to-face meetings, how is your service being affected? How can they reach you? How can you manage that expectation? Some firms have even gone as far as setting up what they call a COVID hub or COVID information point on their website for their clients and for the public to refer to. Indeed, I today spoke with an organisation who, through their website, were able to arrange a face-to-face appointment booking with me. Review your marketing plans. They will most definitely need a revamp in light of the last 6 months. Are any fundamental changes required to enable you to reach new clients as well as service existing ones? And things like call services. A very, very famous one, named after the administrator in James Bond's office. They, I know, are working with a number of law firms now and providing a service whereby clients their calls never have to be missed. So opportunities like that are there. Let's just briefly move back to complaints because this is a big issue. So perhaps consider the handling of complaints not in isolation, but in concert with your other procedures which are affected. Now, at the Best Practice Group, we've analysed the SRA code in line with Lexel and other requirements and looked at complaints. We've dropped a stone in the complaints pond and we've said, well, where does it ripple out to? So some of the policies and procedures which might also benefit from review where complaints handling is concerned in the new remote working world are things like, obviously, the complaints process, your client care process, key dates processes, procedures and policies, of course, file reviews and supervision. Yes, they can be done working remotely, and we speak to a number of firms who found some quite innovative ways of tackling that. Also consider client feedback, and because of course client feedback will still be happening, and even if you don't get the client feedback forms back, of course you're still talking to your clients and you're still talking to potential clients and getting feedback that way. Consider that the challenges that we're currently facing may or may not be permanent. I think some of what we're experiencing with remote working is going to stick long beyond 2020, but some of these things may only be temporary according to what guidance is out there and according to how we work. So it's well worth reviewing your policies and procedures and consider whether perhaps instead of a wholesale review of your office manual would be appropriate, or rewrite, perhaps an addendum. Perhaps you might change one or two things like how you're doing supervision, how you're doing file reviews, how you might deal with new business inquiries. And yes, you could update your office manual, but there's a knock-on effect to other policies and procedures there. Or perhaps you might make a reference from your existing office manual into an addendum or an appendix where you set out how you're going to deal with things in the short term. But of course, you'll need to keep that under very close review. The benefit of doing it that way, of course, is that if there are changes to where you work or the way the government says you need to work, you're only changing an appendix, not the whole office manual. That's just an interesting little tip. But then refer to your client care policy specifically and update this with any changes needed for remote working. And our original podcast 4 weeks ago touched on some of the challenges of updating remote working policies. And finally, ensure that your policies and procedures linked to client care and complaints are up to date. So I've mentioned some of these already, but these will include key dates, client feedback, accepting and declining instructions, file reviews, how inquiries are dealt with, and capacity. Also consider or make sure you review client care as part of your supervision meetings. Get that feedback from your staff. I know of some firms, one in particular, pre-COVID, that actually dispensed with a lot of its, if you like, traditional marketing in favour of reviewing client feedback and making client feedback part of the file review and supervision process. And that insight led to some fundamental changes in how they dealt with promoting their business. And that's never been more true than it is now. And of course, consider your business continuity planning for client care aspects. You may well have had to consider your premises, how you reach out to clients, how they reach out to you. Business continuity talks about business continuity incidents, and we think about fire, we think about flood, we think about cyber attack. But of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic business continuity incident, and so we need to think in there, how do we actually sustain the business in dealing with that business continuity problem? Well, I hope that today's bite-size information has been useful. We're very pleased to say that this is not the only information that we can provide you. We also have checklists available via the PDA Legal website, as well as other short videos and podcasts on essentials for home working and essentials for video conferencing. You can go to the PDA website for more news and information about these, and indeed to get in touch with us, or you can contact us through LinkedIn. We hope you found today's session useful, and we look forward to presenting another Podcast Plus to you again very soon.